welcome to this later afternoon session. Thank you for attending from remote and physical presence. The title of this session is Scientific Diplomacy for Freedom, Intercultural Dialogue for Science. By design, this panel is being divided into two interrelated parts with east-west and north-south axes. In the first part, I, Cinzia Ferrini, from the Department of Humanities of the University of Trieste, will act as moderator. The second part will be moderated by Munir Gribi at my left, Director of the International Cooperation, Communication, Skill Development and Research Promotion Section of the National Institute of Oceanography and Experimental Geophysics, based in Trieste. His distinguished guests are, in order of presentations, the President of the World Academy of Sciences, Mohamed Hassan, and the Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, Lesina Zerbo. Speaking in the first part are Professor Elisabetta Vezzosi, at my right, Head of the Department of Humanities of the University of Trieste, present here in her capacity as Professor of History in the USA in a global context, and Professor Eva Condorosi, recipient of the 2018 Balsam Prize for Chemical Ecology, join us by remote as member of the Hungarian Academy of Science, member of the Board of the Accademia Europea, member of the Group of Chief Scientific Advisor of the European Commission, and former Vice President of the ARC. Let me now introduce briefly background and focus of the first part of this session. The post-COVID-19 world inherits a controversial and complex scenario. On the one hand, in recent months, science has taken center stage in world diplomacy to address a global challenge that disregards national borders. Gemeinsam has been Merkel's key word indicating how to overcome the pandemic crisis. This call for solidarity has a dual aspect. First, scientists previously ignored by policymakers when they warned about avoiding vaccination, dismantling public health care intake system in view of potential epidemics from zoonotic origins, or about the consequences of human impact on our planet ecosystem, including climate change, suddenly were co-opted as governmental advisor into technical scientific national committees. Everyone looked for medical and biological expertise. Virologists unknown to the general public were spotlighted in the media, including polemical talk show. Voices cried out that in a post-COVID world, we need more scientists as leaders to translate their knowledge into political actions, since European countries did too little, too late, and too various to contain the epidemic in its initial phases. In an interview following the ISOF opening ceremony, Fabiola Gianotti urged policymakers, now that you have taken scientists down off the shelves, don't put them back. Second aspect, there are more scientific and multidisciplinary global collaborations and efforts than ever. Thanks to digitalization, all the science regarding COVID-19 is being published with open access, and many preprints are shared on European portals to accelerate research on drugs or vaccine through data sharing and solidarity trials. However, regarding freedom and intercultural dialogues, this scenario is ambivalent, if not paradoxical. Sometimes bridges are built, at others rifts deepen between democracies and other forms of government, with risk that executive powers may take advantage of emergency powers to reinforce authoritarianism. Restrictions on free expression and information and limits on public participation are becoming increasingly common, undermining academic freedom and the role of parliaments. At a European level, Proclaiming togetherness and solidarity coexist with reinforcing national and regional barriers, with border policy overtly militarized to control migration flow on the Western Balkans. At a global level, managing the pandemic has reinforced charges of manipulation and disinformation leveled against China in the USA geopolitical reassessment under Trump's presidency. Proclaimed global scientific cooperation is undermined by Western countries' charges against Russian hackers and Chinese research cyber spies claimed to have attempted to steal the work of British and American university scientists on coronavirus vaccine, and by a race involving public funds and private pharmaceutical partnership. To sum up, the pandemic has developed open access to scientific knowledge and know-how, data sharing and evidence-based policy making, highlighting the role of scientists in decision making. And yet, a pervasive issue is whether COVID-19 is the latest specter of the Cold War to surface in tensions between West and Middle East. This controversial situation in scientific diplomacy is the issue at stake in the first part of this meeting. Our time will end at 6:45 p.m. So I have now a question to my first speaker, that is on my right, Professor Elisabetta Vezzosi, and I would like to have the PowerPoint with my first question, please. What counts as, what counts as scientific diplomacy in our contemporary scenario appears to be a matter of scientists as consultants to policy makers. Moreover, we have already heard yesterday by Bridge and other session that the notion of science diplomacy still needs to be conceptualized in practical operation. Advisors and practitioners seems to be the two main roles actually involved. At the same time, Fabiola Gianotti presented science as a system of values and a powerful tool to break walls. Could you please help us to examine the full meaning and extent of the notion of scientific diplomacy, drawing from some historical example?
Thank you, Cinzia, for the presentation. And I think it's not so easy to give a full explanation, but I try to do some explanation about science diplomacy. I think science diplomacy is based on relationship between scientists and politics, and the role of scientists in international relations in different contexts and historical moments. It is a new dimension of international relations and represents an alternative form of political communication and an important element of what has been defined by Joseph Nye, the political scientist Joseph Nye, as soft power. It is generally considered a form of initiative by individual scientists or organizations, so formal or informal networks of scientists or non-governmental organizations, multilateral agencies. They try to make relevant contributions for the change of international relations. Subject of many and different definitions, science diplomacy remains a very fluid notion that attributes different roles to science. One is, thank you, Cinzia, is supporting foreign policy objectives. Two is facilitating international scientific cooperation. Three, using scientific cooperation to improve relations between different countries. Four, science fostering global academic freedom. Academic freedom is one of the key words of this very large conference and event. In the last few years, science diplomacy has been experiencing a period of very strong valorization, and although is generally identified as a 21st century phenomenon with the aim of creating new knowledge and sharing common objectives, historical research also benefits from it. Many of are the issues at stake. Non ci vedo, ma sono le domande, perché non ci vedo. Have scientific issues really affected diplomatic relations between different countries? Has scientific cooperation been an element of in the achievement of peace? Has the independence of scientists been threatened by scientific diplomacy? Certainly, the increased global relevance of science as public good, recognized by the International Science Council, has led to a progressive integration between scientific cooperation and international relations, between national interest and common interest, so much as to make science diplomacy, as Paul Arthur Beckham wrote, I quote, a source of hope and inspiration for the benefit of all on earth across generations. I close the quote. Still not extensive, and this is my historical part, still not extensive historiography on the relationship between science and politics mostly agree, especially in relation to the different phase of the Cold War, on the lack of independence of the scientists from politics. This very schematically vision changes if the agency of scientists and their organizations is placed as the center of the stage, thus making visible actors predominantly obscured by the prevailing historical narratives, especially about the Cold War. What emerges is not only the leading role of scientist organization in defense of human rights and their role in transforming the issue into a central element of East-West diplomatic relations, but the very strong and sometimes conflicting confrontation between scientists and government policy choices. The results of these debates have, in fact, changed, in some cases, the agenda of international meetings and their outcomes. So, question, do you see the question? The next question?
Is the next. Yeah.
The historical question?
I think it's the next slide.
Next, excuse me, I don't see it. So, at the stake, again, of the historical stake, what was the role of scientists during the different phases of the Cold War? How did they manage to question the division of that long period on the basis of scientific and research freedom? And what was the role of scientists in play in promoting the defense of human rights globally and in ending the bipolar conflict, these are just some of the questions at stake that historiography put on the center of the historiographical interpretation of the Cold War. And I think that we have to consider that in the last 20 years, we have assisted and we have seen a flourishing of studies on the role of scientists in influencing international relations after the Second World War, and especially in the period of Cold War. And some historical works have highlighted the forms of collaboration that have made possible innumerable scientific discoveries and innovation, stressing the example, for example, the profoundly transnational character of the community of physics who emigrated from Europe to the United States following the rise of Nazism, the construction of forms of scientific internationalism around the Atom for Peace program of the 50s, and the importance of networks between scientists in the construction of Europe.
They ask you to summarize.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And I don't see, but this is the historical example.
Very short. Yeah.
See, very shortly, there are 3 historical examples I like to mention. The first one is the role of scientists as important advisor in the Helsinki Final Act of 1975. That is the most important accord between East and West during the 70s, in the period we, as historians, we define as detente between East and West relation. The second example is the role of scientists in changing the agenda of the Hamburg Scientific Forum of the Commission of Security, the Cooperation and Security in Europe Commission in the 1980, and third, and I think it's very important example for the for Trieste and this reality, the creation of the International Center for Theoretical Physics in 1964. So if you prefer, I stop here and then I
think we
reprend.
can. Yes, that was indeed the last.
Okay.
Now we have another speaker, that is Professor Eva Condorosi, that should be connected from remote.
Yes, I am.
Eva, thank you for joining us. Welcome. And I have a question for you. You are a member of the group of chief scientific advisor of the European Commission, and you are directly involved in the scientific advice mechanism at the highest European level. You are also an internationally renowned scientist, directing your research at a biological research center in Hungary. Considering your working experience, would you please describe how scientific expertise relates or should relate to political action and diplomacy? Moreover, how you would describe the state of the relation between scientists and policy in Hungary during the Cold War and today?
Okay. Maybe I will start my presentation. I think you agree with me that now, maybe more than ever, Policymakers need good quality scientific advice for their decision. But most of the world's most pressing problems are incredibly complex. We need systematic knowledge, but maybe this is only partially available when there are many, many uncertainties. So science advice is one input to policy making. This is a unique advice and very important. And for this reason, under the Horizon 2020, in 2015, the European Commission decided to establishment of a scientific advice mechanism. This is done to have independent advice from the best expert in guiding political decisions, legislations. It is designed to be transparent and as free of bias as possible. This mechanism is composed of the group of chief scientific advisors, 7 members, who work with a dedicated unit within the European Commission, as well as with the SAPEA consortium. SAPEA means Science Advice for Policy by European Academies. And this is a consortium of about 100 universities, European universities. So if there is a topic, then the SAPEA provides evidence reviews and analysis. Then the group of chief scientific advisors provides scientific advice, and this is transmitted to the European Commission for better policy making and legislation outcome for the citizens. Here are some examples for the SAPEA evidence reviews. You can see that they are really timely and very actual questions, but I would like to mention the last one, making sense of science for policy. Science advice must be based on the best available evidence, communicated in a transparent and accountable way that explicitly and honestly assesses uncertainties, ambiguities, and tensions. And there are also recommendations in this report. The relationship between science advisors and policymakers should rely on trust. The science advice process combines systematic and peer-reviewed knowledge and discussions that lead to evidence-based information and value-based conclusions. And this should involve stakeholders and citizens. They should be integrated in this process. So science advice is not limited to policymakers, but also requires communication to a wider society. Now you asked me about Hungary. Hungary has traditionally strong base in science and education. Elisabetta talked about the Cold War, and Hungary was part of the Eastern Bloc or Communist Bloc from 1984 and until 1991. This period was the period of the isolation. These countries, which belonged to the Eastern Bloc, they were divided or separated from the rest of the world by the Iron Curtain. In spite of this, in Hungary, due to the good basis of science and education, there were already, or also in this time, quite groundbreaking discoveries. So the science was more or less maintained at a level which was possible with very little support for research. From 1989, the borders are open, so this increased scientific collaboration, brain circulation, and brain drain. Hungary became member of the European Union in 2004. The country could participate in the EU framework programs and Horizon 2020. And here I would like to show an example which is taken data from the ERC. And you can see that Hungary was relatively or highly successful among the countries which belong to the former Eastern Bloc, so 9% success rate during the period from 2007 until 2018. And this exceptional success, actually due to programs which were started by the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, which helped the return of many Hungarians who worked abroad and started their own laboratory with a nice support by the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. And these young researchers were prepared and mentored and coached to apply for the ERC. So this was really a great success. Unfortunately, we do not have enough people to apply for the grant, but it was okay. And most of these ERC grantees worked either in the Research Institute of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences or in the Central European University. Now, during the last 2 years, some changes happened. The government has recently made steps to reduce the space for this independent and well-performing research and educational organizations. So they changed the legislation, which made impossible the functioning of CEU in Hungary, and therefore the university had to move to Vienna this summer. Also, the research centers and Institute of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences were attached from the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, and they were placed under a new governmental organization, despite the protest of scientists. And so far, nobody could tell the reason why it was necessary, why this change will make the science better in Hungary. There is another fear, and maybe losing a little bit the trust of the scientists, because the granting system was transparent and merit-based in Hungary during the last 30 years. And now, very recently, during the last days, it became non-transparent because scientific evaluation, peer-reviewed proposals which were ranked by Hungarian and national experts were changed, and also those ones who were at the bottom of this list could get or were replaced by higher quality scientists and could get funding. So this makes some problem now in Hungary, and I hope that this will be solved soon. We even sent a letter to the Prime Minister to find solutions for this kind of problems.
Eva, thanks. I want your voice being heard in Hezov, and that's why I asked you to open a window on the situation, academic situation in your country. If you don't mind, I would like to address you a second question. And if we have time, I have a second question for Elisabetta too. And because, you know, ESOF in Trieste has the mission to open a window on Balkan and Eastern European countries. You have served as Vice President of the European Research Council and chaired the working group on widening European participation. You are also a distinguished member of the Pan-European Academia Europea, where you also establish a working group on widening European participation. What is your view on this topic? How to help researchers of Eastern European countries to gain equal access to European-funded research programs, or to create conditions to integrate otherwise peripheral academic personnel, circumstances and resources? What do you see as the most effective way to make progress here? And what do you see as the role for the Academy of Europe?
I think the widening European participation is extremely important. And this is important not only for these countries, but for Europe as a whole. Now again, I can show the example of the ERC grants, and we can see that from the ERC budget, 98% goes to the EU 15 countries, so this, and only 2% or maybe 3% to the new member states. And there are many countries where there are no ERC grants at all. So it shows really that if we continue like that and we cannot find some solution, even with the ERC we are supporting already the research-intensive countries and not so much those ones which really need support. So when I started the working group on widening participation, we made a survey. What are the obstacles and hampering factors? Of course, the low level of research investment was one of the major reasons. Also, the inadequate research funding system, because usually the funds are very, very low and not appropriate for ambitious, internationally competitive research. Also, the isolation, lack of mobility, and international scientific atmosphere is really a hampering factor. And very few applications are coming from this country, and which is even more problem that very few high-quality applications. Moreover, the salaries are low, and there is a big brain drain. So if you look at the success of Switzerland or UK, these are not the nationals, but these are the people who went to these countries, and many people are going from these former Eastern Bloc countries. So what is absolutely necessary to have a networking? And COST, the European Association for Cooperation in Science and Technology, provides an excellent system which can help as a pre-portal for subsequent application to the EU funding. This finances networking with priority from young researchers and researchers from less research-intensive countries. So those who participated in the cost action, they could get a success rate in other European funding system up to 30%. So this is really an extremely good success rate and change. Academia Europea, the widening European participation is a strategic priority at the academy. We established also a working group, and we try to identify candidates from these countries who can be nominated and could be ambassador also of the Academia Europea and could be involved in the Academia Europea activities. So this is one thing, this is a must, and we are doing it. We distributed among us the countries, and we are looking for the talents on these countries. There are also Academia Europea knowledge hubs. Wrocław, Tbilisi, and Budapest, which will open only this year in December, has the major task for the widening participation. And we are doing coaching, networking programs, lecture series, involvement in scientific cooperation, and also in the health activities. So we hope that all the efforts what we are making will have a benefit. And we could see already at the ERC that there is an improvement in the success rate in the ERC applications, and we think that the future of European science can be achieved only with global Europe when we found an all talent in Europe.
Thank you so much, and remain connected, remain joining us, please, up to the end of the session. And I have time to, now I would like to come back. Okay, thank you. No, devo andare indietro, allora. Per andare indietro, how can I use this device to come back with my slides, please? Okay, doesn't matter. As I mentioned, it is commonly suggested, Elisabetta, in the media, that with the COVID emergency, we confront the specters of returning to a Cold War of the Western, Middle East axis. And what I would like you to, just to tell us very briefly, we have 10 minutes, from an historical standpoint, to what extent is the Cold War a useful or suitable model for these developments?
As you know, I do not agree with this kind of definition. And I think that the new Cold War is become certainly the description of the current rivalry between the United States and China, but I think it is not right. As Mario Del Pero states, he is a very important international relations scholar. He teaches Sciences Po in Paris. As Mario Del Pero states, some structural similarities do indeed exist with the post-Second World War global confrontation between West and East and the actual situation. We live now in a sort of bipolar system in terms of economic power, military power, global influence, ability to pollute the planet. Just during the Cold War, this bipolarism was asymmetrical, and now is asymmetrical. One, United States, is more powerful and influential than the other. In the past was Soviet Union, now is China. But the similarities between the past and the present finish at this point. There are three very simple reasons for me why this definition is not right. The first one is that the Cold War was an ideological clash between two universalisms, two visions of history and of historical process, two models of modernity. Nothing in the current relationship between China and the US resembles this confrontation in these terms. And in the past was a irresolvable ideological antagonism, and now is not. The second motivation is that in the Cold War, geopolitical elements interplayed with ideology. The concern was primarily focused on Europe and especially Germany in particular. It was a conflict for Europe and over Europe, and obviously nothing in the current competition between China and the US resembles the Eurocentrism of the Cold War. The third and final motivation is that the globalization is because globalization and how it has transformed contemporary international relations. The Cold War in the past was a system based on an original lack of recognition between the two superpowers, a refusal to accept the legitimacy of each other. There was an absence of interaction in a first phase and a consequent mutually assured destruction in the second phase, the atomic bomb and the atomic menace. Now, over the past 50 years, we have seen a process of global integration that frequently puts the Sino-American relationship at its very center. So interaction between the two countries has become both a product and a decisive driver of globalization, so the partnership in some way. And the confrontation too are an element, the basic element of globalization. So if we call the current rivalry between China and US, a new Cold War, we lose sight of the historical uniqueness and specificity of their relationship, and we miss the only real lesson of the study of the past. To avoid easy answer and look at the complexity, in other words, to historicize. That I think is very, very important at the moment. The last and final word on this subject is that in the COVID-19 era, scientist internationalism is more and more important. One, United States and China rate of collaboration is increased by 5% in the last few months. Two, scientific collaboration across borders is a positive sum endeavor in the last few months in COVID phase. Third, science transcends political agenda. So I think this is the moment of collaboration, and scientists internationalism and transnationalism is showing that this is possible.
Thanks so much, because this last answer really elucidates the misuse of analogies in contemporary debate. And we have 2 minutes for a question from the floor. If there is anybody that would like to raise any question, we have just 2 minutes. Please. I think there is a microphone for you. You have 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Thank you very, very much for all of the talks. I'm particularly happy about this criticism of the attempt to reinactivate this Cold War model, which I agree with you is entirely mistaken. You made an interesting addition to your slide in commenting on the ideological antagonism between the USA and the USSR in the Cold War. In your comments, you called it an irrational ideological antagonism. And we don't have that kind of ideological antagonism between the USA and China. It's just irrational antagonism. And part of it is that we're suffering, as we have for many centuries, a tragedy of the commons, with national power interests, whether political or economic, wanting to maintain monopoly control. And it has been in tension with inquiry, scientific inquiry, geographical inquiry, for centuries. And we still have that battle between knowledge which is shareable and the group interests that want to use that knowledge for group gain, group benefit, typically at the expense of others. That dynamic hasn't gone away, unfortunately. Just a brief comment, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We are finished our time. We are absolutely in time, and I am happy to give the floor to Munir for the second part of this session, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Ferrini, and I'm very pleased to be here too. I will be immediately presenting our distinguished guests, Professor Mohammed Hassan, the President of the World Academy of Sciences, TWAS, and Dr. Lesina Zerbo, Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, Ctbto, from Vienna. So Professor Hassan, as I said, president of the TWAS, is also a good friend of the Trieste scientific system. He's a national of Sudan, and he serves as president of the Sudanese National Academy of Science, and also he's a member of number of boards of international organizations. And of course, after obtaining his PhD, he came back in Sudan, and he was the dean also of the Faculty of Mathematics. And Professor Hassan is a member of several merit-based academies of science worldwide. So thank you, Professor Hassan, for being with us. I really appreciate that. Together with Professor Hassan, I am honored to have with us, as I said, Dr. Lesina Zerbo, the Executive Secretary of the Ctbto in Vienna. Since 2013, he was also reappointed for the second term in 2016. Dr. Zerbo is a national of Burkina Faso. He has been instrumental in cementing the Ctbto position as a world center of excellence for nuclear test ban verification, as well as in driving forces towards the universalization and comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty, which is not an easy task. Zerbo has served also in many and multiple international organizations, and I really thank him for being with us and accepting our invitation. So let me start with the presentation of Professor Hassan, and I'm kindly asking the Yusuf technical team to launch the presentation. Please.
Let me begin by thanking each of organizers, and in particular Dr. Munir Bribi, for inviting me to give this talk. What I intend to do in this presentation is to highlight a number of important issues related to both science diplomacy and scientific migration. So my talk consists of two parts: science diplomacy and scientific migration. Science diplomacy, as we define it in this presentation, is a platform that facilitates scientific communication and collaboration between different countries and communities, irrespective of political differences or strained relations. As such, science diplomacy is shaped by three trends. First, the passion of scientists to collaborate with the best in their field, wherever their location. And second, the use of scientific tools to improve relations between countries that have politically strained relations. And third, and this is what's important for us here in this presentation, is the need for global partnership in science, technology, and innovation to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And what I will do is to give examples of these three trends for each one of them. For the first one, and that's collaboration of scientists in different countries, I think the best example one can give at the moment in the midst of this COVID-19 is to see how international collaboration in research is shaping up. Despite the escalating conflict between the US and China in trade, technology, and COVID-19, what is now known as the new Cold War, and the lack of global coordination of production and distribution of vaccines against the virus, this is what has led to what is now called vaccine nationalism. Despite all this, the number of peer-reviewed research publications related to COVID-19 by multiple authors from different countries has been increasing steadily, according to a recent analysis of Scopus Bibliometric. And you can see in the map how the three most important regions, China, Europe, and North America, how this intensive collaboration is happening now in this picture. The second is the science diplomacy for improving relations. This is the second trend. And one of the best illustrations of this is President Obama speech in Cairo in June 2009, where he outlined a plan to use science to improve relations between the US and the Muslim world, including opening centers of scientific excellence in Africa, Middle East, and Southeast Asia, and appointing science envoys to each of the three regions. These are eminent scientists, American scientists, including, for example, the late Nobel Prize winner, Ahmed Zuhail, who traveled to the Middle East to help build bridges between the United States and North Africa in the area of science, technology, and innovation. To my knowledge, this program is still continuing. It's probably the only excellent program that Obama did during his presidency that Trump kept and didn't abolish. Science diplomacy for the Sustainable Development Goals, of course, this is very, very important, very central to all the global challenges facing us today. And the Sustainable Development Goals, of course, themselves is a clear example of science diplomacy at its best. All nations agreed to achieve all the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And science, technology, and innovation are critical to all these Sustainable Development Goals. In particular, I would like to highlight Sustainable Development Goal 17, which talks about partnerships, and as well as the Sustainable Development 13 about climate change. Climate change is really a very, very important central issue in sustainability at the moment. The climate agreement, the one that was agreed upon in Paris in 2015, where 195 countries adopted the universal agreement to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, is one of the greatest successes, I think, in science diplomacy, if not the greatest one. And this is really thanks to the leadership of President Obama and President Xi. You see them in this picture. Unfortunately, a setback happened in 2017 when Trump decided to withdraw from the Paris climate. That was a great setback, and many people in the United States and all around the world were very concerned and very annoyed about this decision. Al Gore said in one of his talks that voting Trump out in 2020 would save Paris Climate Agreement. So let's see what happens in November. One thing that is positive, probably the only thing that one can say positive that emerged out of this decision by Trump, is the mobilization of communities around the world to defend the science, to defend the trust in scientific facts. So we saw in 2017 this March for Science movement and the build-up of global public support to evidence-based policies. This is continuing every year. There are marches like this all around the world, and the last one was in 2019. I don't know this year because of the COVID-19, probably they did not manage to do something similar to that. And related to this is what we have seen recently, this youth movement, climate change action now, where young people are really banding together, mobilizing themselves, and moving forward in their thousands. They're protesting in streets of big cities around the world, demanding climate action now. One of the leaders of this youth movement is Greta Thunberg, and you can see her here, this very famous lady from Sweden. She did a marvelous job in mobilizing young people and the youth all around the world. So these are positive things that happened after the climate agreement and the setback that happened. Let me now move on to international scientific migration. And here one should distinguish between 2 types of migration. Voluntary migration of scientists, this is where scientists, excellent scientists, living and working in their country face difficulties in conducting their research because of the quality of education, the working conditions, the research facilities. So they move to countries where these facilities are better. And so there's a brain drain from those countries, but there's a brain gain from the countries that pull them, where they have world-class universities and centers of excellence and good working conditions and research facilities. A very good example of a migrant scientist is Abdul Salam himself, who left Pakistan because he could not pursue his research and his dream to make discoveries in high-energy physics. So he decided to move back to London and Cambridge, and later on he founded the ICTP. He was awarded the Nobel Prize, and he was also founded TWAS in 1983. It's a good example of a migrant scientist who decided to leave voluntarily. But there is also involuntary migration. This is what we call now refugee scientists or displaced scientists or scientists at risk. And the push factors here are war, conflict, terrorism, climate change, disasters, poverty, and so on. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees estimates that 80 million forcibly displaced people are documented in the year 2019. 80 million people forcibly displaced. 85 of them are hosted in developing countries, and 70% hosted in neighboring countries. And you can see examples of those. But what concerns us here, not all the refugees, but refugee scientists. And there are large numbers of these scientists, teachers and engineers and medical doctors and students, among those millions in refugee camps. And this is really a brain loss to countries and to humanity, to countries where they came from, and also to humanity. And one should really think of how to help these refugee scientists. Let us remember that the world's most famous science refugees are Albert Einstein and Enrico Fermi. Both of them left their countries because they were afraid to face persecution in their countries. Let us also remember that 40% of American Nobel laureates are migrants or refugees. So you never know, maybe among all these refugees you see here on this photo on your left, maybe there is the next Einstein or the next Fermi. And that's why I think we should really look after those scientists who find themselves in this very difficult situation. So how to save refugee scientists? A very important workshop, maybe one of the first workshops to be organized to address the issue of refugee scientists as a transnational resource. I'm referring to a workshop that was held by TWAS, OGS, and EMUNI in Trieste in March 2017. The workshop was attended by a good number of scientists, policymakers, diplomats, refugee administrators, refugee scientists. It had extensive coverage in Italian and European media. The workshop discussed challenges, opportunities facing refugee scientists and recommended positive action. Among the important recommendations are the following: the identification of refugee scientists and addressing their potential and professional needs. This is very important. If you really want to help them, you have to identify them. And that can be carried out by establishing links with refugee processing centers and UN Refugee Agency, establishing websites to be viewed on mobile phones to make it easier for people, that provide information about refugee scientists and offer information about opportunities, and developing databases of refugee scientists and their areas of expertise. And second, to develop coordinated and harmonized policies to support education, training, and job opportunities for refugee and displaced scientists. I can give you examples, excellent examples in this, one of them from the European Commission. They recently established a program called Science for Refugees. It was launched by the European Commission to help refugee scientists find suitable jobs. It is like a matchmaking program of talented refugee scientists with European institutions. And the grants provided under this program are competitive grants, and they are provided to the institutions that host these refugee scientists. But again, this is selective. They select the best and most talented refugee scientists and offer them positions at universities and institutions in Europe. There is also a very, very good program, a national program in Germany under the umbrella of the University of Bremen. It is called At Risk and Refugee Scientists website. This is really a website that has a collection of links. Currently they have about 10 links supporting displaced and at-risk scientists in the country. An example of that is the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation that supports refugee scientists at risk in Germany by offering them competitive funding to be provided as fellowships to accepted refugees. And finally, I would like to highlight this very, very important new initiative, a new project launched in June 2020 to develop a coordinated response to the increasing number of displaced and at-risk scientists. It is a collaborative project involving three very important international science organizations: the International Science Council, the IAP, the Inter-Academy Partnership, and to us, the World Academy of Sciences. And the aim is to develop a global, comprehensive, and online database of organizations that support refugee scientists, to organize virtual meetings of these organizations to share experiences, best practices, and to identify gaps and implement joint action. And finally, to develop recommendations to institutions, funding agencies, and governments on helping displaced scientists. So these are just a few issues that I raised in science diplomacy and refugee scientists or displaced scientists, and I will be very happy to answer questions later on during the discussion period. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me begin by
Thank you very much, Professor Hassan. And I'm also happy that we succeed to make this connection from Khartoum. Before we go to the debate, I would like to kindly ask also the EASE of technical team to launch a video from the Ctbto on putting an end to nuclear explosions. So let's first see the video, and then we will start immediately with the debate.
It will be difficult to conceal a nuclear test. If you were to do a test underground, we have all these seismic stations in the earth. If you were to explode one in the air, we have the infrasound network, which is capable of detecting sounds that we as human beings cannot hear. If you were to do a test in the oceans, we have the hydroacoustic network. We also have the radionuclide network to detect any radioactive activity. If something happens, we'll know about it very quickly. I have seen this system in action when North Korea detonated its last bomb. So my phone rang, it's really early in the morning, and my supervisor told me that we have an interesting event. Can you come to the office now and have a look at the data? On your way, it's exciting because you're thinking of what could have happened? You know, I mean, is this for real? I'm responsible for making sure that the information that is analyzed from the data that comes out from all our sensors is of the right quality when it goes to the member states. There's the excitement of having to work with this event that you're called for. At the same time, there is that reservation to say, okay, guys, is everything correct here? There's so much at stake. We have to make sure that our analysis is as accurate as possible so that when this data is passed on to the member states, they then can make the correct call. When we have done the analysis of the event, we know accurately where the event has occurred, when and how big that event is. But then that's not the end of the story, because tomorrow I have to come back to work. Because work continues. Because whilst this event has happened, it doesn't stop any other event from occurring throughout the world. And we still have to come in and do our analysis as usual. It's such a rare opportunity to be able to say, hey, I worked on these events and I've worked for Ctbto, you know, to ensure that the rest of the world is safe.
Thank you. So let's start our debate, and I have one question to Dr. Zerbo from Vienna. Also in the same line with the video we have just seen right now, and it is a question on science diplomacy and international security, facilitating dialogue and peace. So the question is, the international community faces widening gaps in international security. As Executive Secretary of the Ctbto, do you think science diplomacy can help overcome the divides on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation and create basis for dialogue and peace? Do you have some experiences that can be shared with us?
Thank you, Dr. Munir. Thank you for inviting me to this wonderful event organized together with TWAS and ASOF. I want to say to Professor Hassan that I'm honored to share the platform with him. So we met, our last meeting was in Jeddah when we went for the Islamic Conference Science Diplomacy event. So Professor Munir, good to be with you.
Thank you.
So Munir, your question on international and science and diplomacy and international security, let me say that it is no secret that international relations are now heavy with tension and mistrust. And this is possibly most felt in the field of international security and nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Finding common ground has been difficult, in part due to hardening national security interests. However, avenues of cooperation beyond the security realm have helped balance strained relationships and maintain open channel of communication to build trust much needed. One such avenue is science. In some instances, scientists have kept talking across well-protected borders. Although political disagreement posed a challenge for dialogue, even during the Cold War, it has been talked about earlier by other panelists, the two superpowers were frequently able to maintain scientific links. By 1980s, numerous agreements on scientific cooperation were in place between the United States and the Soviet Union. More recently, the collaboration between Western and Iranian scientists was of utmost importance in paving the way for a joint comprehensive plan of action with Iran. If that is under strain now, it is not because of the technical work, and we all know that. Another example, and strong example, is Sicily in the Middle East. It is the Middle East's first major international research center. It is designed to host scientists from across the region. Instead of career diplomats and statesmen focused on narrower national agendas, researchers and practitioners with particular scientific expertise are focusing on research to address shared questions and all this divorce from politics. Science can also demonstrate that technical solutions to shared problems are possible. This enables diplomats and other policymakers to build the political will needed to make those solutions a reality. So that will be my take on this first question that you asked, Munir.
Thank you very much. So I have a question to Professor Hassan, and following your presentation, I will say that we are living in a time of exceptional human migration. Wars, civil conflicts, and political unrest are to blame for many of these movements, with an important impact recently in countries such as Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen. In countries such as Jordan, which are, let's say, the bordering countries, Lebanon, Turkey, as well as in many European countries, governments and organizations have mounted difficult but admirable efforts to support refugees and others displaced by war. Amongst displaced people, there are many scientists, researchers, and students that flee those countries in increases looking for better life. My question is, do you think the global community is doing enough to help not to lose such a human capital, to support their integration in the new societies, and to help them reconstruct their own countries?
Okay. You finished?
Yes, I do.
Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Munir, for this question. I think the global community, although it's doing a good job, should certainly do much more to help displaced scientists. And based on my presentation, I can think of two ways to do that. First, in my presentation, I gave a couple of successful experiences of saving refugee scientists in Europe. Now, there are other similar examples in Europe and the United States where governments, institutions, and foundations are providing support to displaced scientists. In my view, these successful practices need to be emulated and scaled up, especially in the developing world, where large numbers of refugee scientists are seeking safety and are not getting the support they badly need. One organization that can help science refugees in developing countries is my own organization, TWAS. Given appropriate support, TWAS, through its very well-known South-South science diplomacy research and training programs, can easily provide a good number of fellowships to displaced scientists, particularly in Africa and Middle East, to pursue research and training at universities and centers of excellence in other developing countries. And as I said, this is one of the very successful programs of TWAS, where annually they can place 600, 650 scientists from disadvantaged developing countries to go and study in countries like China, India, Brazil, Mexico, and so on. And the second relates to organizations that seek to support scientists at risk. These organizations should try hard to work together to provide opportunities for these displaced scientists. This is really a call for more collaboration and partnership among these organizations. And a good example, if I may say, is the recent joint initiative by the Trieste-based international centers and organizations to provide and coordinate research and training opportunities for refugee scientists. And I'm talking about the ICTP, the main center we have in the Trieste system, the ICGEB, the ODS, CISA, IAP, TWAS, and others. These are the organizations that are actually helping in the organization of ESOP 2020. So this is one of the examples, but I think we need collaboration among various organizations that deal with this issue of helping refugee scientists. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Professor Hassan. And I have another question to Dr. Zerbo regarding the impact of science on policy. And I will say immediately that you are a scientist by education. You obtained a PhD in geophysics from Université de Paris. And you lead an international organization with a very sensitive political mandate. This is rather unique. Does your formation as scientist impact your strategy leading the Ctbto and addressing diplomatic issues, in which is the treaty an illustration of the nexus between science and diplomacy? So how did you and your organization succeed to provide an innovative framework for interacting with the wider scientific community, especially in a sensitive area such as nuclear research?
Munir, thank you again. I think this is a question that often comes to me when I'm in panels across the world. But let me say that one thing in my personal experience that I cherish the most is that sometimes people think that I'm a scientist, and then sometimes they ask me, in which mission did you serve before coming to Vienna? So I'm often confused as a scientist or confused as a diplomat. So that's basically the making of my work, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. I've been in this organization for long enough. The Ctbt is one of the greatest examples of the nexus between science and diplomacy, science and policy. The scientific aspect of nuclear test ban got underway long before the political side was ready to take the lead. Almost since the start of the nuclear arms race, it was recognized that ending explosive nuclear testing globally was absolutely vital for halting the proliferation of nuclear weapons. So the end of Cold War has helped create the political space needed for negotiation on the legal framework for the test ban. But this could not have been feasible without 2 decades, and I say 2 decades of painstaking preparation by a group of scientific experts. They brought together scientists from different countries to conduct joint research into possible monitoring technologies and data analysis methods, as you can see from the video that preceded our debate, for the verification of the nuclear test ban. So, trust by verify. Trust could be bringing together the political aspect for a legal framework, but verify because you need the technology to that effect. So it was the work of these scientists that made the negotiation on the Ctbt possible. They proved that the comprehensive zero-yield nuclear test ban could be verified. And when I say zero-yield, you probably read or hear recently in the news what's the concept of zero-yield, and are countries, and especially the P5, adhering to this concept. And it has been scientists and technicians that have put in place the world's only global monitoring nuclear tests and monitoring system for nuclear tests. For almost 25 years now, as you know, the Ctbto PrepCom, the Preparatory Commission, has been established and maintaining our international monitoring system. This is a real and the real feat of science and diplomacy. As I mentioned, policy first, and then science to verify the legal framework that's set by policy. So a technological network located worldwide that can catch signs of nuclear explosion and also be of use for a range, and I say a big range of civil and scientific application. So throughout this time, interaction with the wider scientific community has been vital. We brought scientists, technicians working in technology relevant to our work, and the verification we rotated in and out of the Ctbt from national administration, the private sector, and the academy. In addition, we have sought to reach out to connect with community through various innovative means, but above all, through our series of science and technology conference and fostering Ctbt Virtual Data Exploitation Center, which Trieste can fully participate in, and then some of your scientists do. And that gives researchers access to our data for their own studies. So our biennial science and technology and the work of researchers using this platform has helped shed light on the use of Ctbt data beyond nuclear test explosions and nuclear test detection. Ctbt data has been made available for tsunami as an example, tracking of radionuclides after civil nuclear accident like Fukushima, climate monitoring, and then we talked about climate change early on, and a whole range of other applications. So our solid scientific base and our constant connection with scientific community has undoubtedly helped the standing of the organization as a whole. The Ctbt is a scientific resource that the international community depends on. I think there is much that other organizations can learn from us. But above all, it is be a trusted partner, provide value to all your part members, and be as inclusive as possible. That's what I can give as an example on my own experience as a scientist who is now lost in the policy issues of diplomacy. Thank you.
Thanks to you. So I'm at the end of the debate, and I'm inviting Professor Hassan to the few words, really some, let's say, recommendation that Professor Hassan will address a message to young people, the youth of today and the managers of tomorrow, to encourage them opening horizon for dialogue and partnership and cooperation. Why? Because Professor Hassan is an internationally recognized scientist, a distinguished member of various academies of science, an eminent person, and a promoter of science for peace. You are coming from a developing country, from a continent that suffers poverty, and from a region that is often in conflict and political instability. Recently, with the health emergency, we have seen that the pandemic phenomenon does not stop at the borders, and it is a transboundary defeat that needs joint effort and cooperation. The situation is, of course, difficult, but could be transformed to an opportunity to work together. So really, Professor Hassan, few words saying to the young people, this is an opportunity and not a constraint.
Thank you very much, Munir. I mean, I can think of so many messages to give to young scientists, but because of the time limit, I would just mention two messages. First, a message to young and talented researchers, especially those mobilized under the Global Young Academy, the National Young Academies, and the Trieste Young Affiliates networks, and several other organizations that bring together talented young scientists. To these scientists, young scientists, I say, you should use your creativity, ability, and energy to generate new ideas to help solve real-world problems. You should reach out to each other and form virtual interdisciplinary research teams to address complex global challenges. And your mastery of frontier information and communication technologies will make it much easier for you to reach out to each other and to do this job. And together, you should use the strong voice of young scientists to influence policy by providing evidence on critical problems such as COVID-19 and climate change. The second is a more general message to the youth around the world. And for them, I say, you should expand and solidify your involvement in political, social, and economic issues that affect your future and the future of your children. You are a powerful and effective force when you rally around a common cause, such as climate action now and against COVID-19. And because of the pandemic, you should organize global virtual rallies demanding international collaboration that is lacking at the moment to put an end to COVID-19 and action to ensure quality education for all in the aftermath of the pandemic. So, because of the sake of time, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Hassan. Thank you, both of you, distinguished guests. I really thank you, Dr. Lesina, Zerbo, merci beaucoup, and thank you, Professor Hassan, shukran. And I also give the floor to questions, if not final remarks from Professor Ferrini.
Is there anybody that would like to raise questions? We have a couple of minutes.
1 minute, 40 seconds.
1 minute, 40 seconds.
So if not, we could conclude here. So thank you very much. Thank you to everybody. And
For
I hope
attending. It was a real pleasure, and I hope that you have seen how well the two parts come out to be integrated in only one.
in the beginning, when we thought about that, we thought about the West-East relationship and the North-South, but now we put them together here, and it's
We had a compass of
exactly.
all the world.
So it's in somehow the worldwide. So thank you very much for everything.
Working.
Thank
it was
you.
working. Thanks for attending.